Picture this. 85 million Iranians wake up to news that shatters their World Cup dreams. Across Tehran, cafes fall silent. In Tabriz, a young boy clutches his football jersey, tears streaming down his face. From Shiraz to Isfahan, a collective gasp echoes through a nation that bleeds football, a country where the beautiful game isn't just sport. It's identity, it's hope, it's the one arena where politics fade and passion reigns supreme. But today, politics has delivered the cruelest blow imaginable. Donald Trump has just dropped a bombshell that's sending shockwaves across every continent. Iran's national football team banned, expelled, barred from the 2026 World Cup on American soil. Not for failing to qualify, not for breaking FIFA regulations, but through executive power that's rewriting the rules of international sport as we know it. FIFA headquarters in Zurich erupts in emergency sessions. World leaders scramble for phone lines. Sports commentators struggle to find words. Because this isn't just about 32 teams competing for a trophy. This is about sovereignty, international law, and whether a host nation can weaponize the world's most beloved sporting event. Iran's team ranked in the top 20 globally, filled with talent playing in Europe's elite leagues, representing a footballing tradition stretching back decades, suddenly finds itself on the outside looking in at their own World Cup. Their training camps, their qualifying battles, their dreams of redemption on the biggest stage all vanishing in a single presidential decree. The question burning through newsrooms, living rooms, and locker rooms worldwide. Can he actually do this? Should he do this? And what happens when you tell 1.4 billion Muslims that their champions aren't welcome at football's greatest celebration? Stay with me, because what unfolds next will change sports and geopolitics forever. If you want to stay ahead of stories that are reshaping our world, hit that subscribe button right now. We're diving deep into the stories others won't touch. Don't miss what comes next. Let's rewind to understand how we arrived at this unprecedented moment. The relationship between the United States and Iran has been frozen in hostility since 1979, when revolutionaries stormed the American embassy in Tehran, holding diplomats hostage for 444 days. That crisis imprinted itself on American consciousness, creating a wound that never fully healed. Trade sanctions, diplomatic isolation, accusations of terrorism sponsorship, the list goes on. But sport? Sport always existed in a different dimension. When Iran faced the United States at the 1998 World Cup in France, something magical happened. Before kickoff, Iranian players handed white roses to their American opponents. The match became known as the most politically charged game in World Cup history, yet it remained just that, a game. Iran won 2-1, but the real victory belonged to the universal language of football, proving that even the bitterest enemies could compete with respect and dignity on the pitch. Fast forward to the present administration. Trump's return to power brought with it a hardline revival of maximum pressure policies against Tehran. The nuclear deal, painstakingly negotiated over years, lies in tatters. Economic sanctions have intensified to suffocating levels. Diplomatic channels, what few remained, have been severed. Military tensions simmer constantly in the Persian Gulf. Revolutionary Guard commanders and American generals engage in their dangerous dance of brinkmanship, each testing the other's resolve. But nobody, absolutely nobody, predicted this move would extend to the football pitch. The 2026 World Cup represents something extraordinary in sporting history. For the first time, 3 nations will co-host: the United States, Mexico, and Canada. 48 teams instead of the traditional 32, meaning more nations, more matches, more dreams realized. Cities from Vancouver to Mexico City to Miami will host matches, creating a North American football festival spanning 2 months. The economic projections are staggering: billions in revenue, millions of visitors. A global television audience measured not in millions but billions. When the announcement came, it didn't arrive through normal diplomatic channels. No carefully worded State Department press release. No advance warning to FIFA. Instead, Trump took to social media, announcing in characteristically blunt fashion that Iran posed a security risk too significant to allow their participation. The reasoning? Allegations of the Iranian government's involvement in regional conflicts, support for groups Washington designates as terrorists, and an unspecified threat assessment suggesting Iranian fans and officials could endanger the tournament's security. The immediate reaction was volcanic. Iran's foreign ministry issued a statement within hours, calling the ban illegal, unprecedented, and a violation of every principle of international sport. Their football federation president appeared on state television, voice cracking with emotion, declaring this an act of political warfare disguised as security concerns. Iran's star players, many of them earning millions in European leagues, took to social media with messages ranging from disbelief to fury. Serdar Azman, playing for Rama, posted a simple image, his national team jersey with the caption, "They can ban the team, but they cannot kill our love." But Iran's response was just the beginning. Qatar, hosts of the 2022 World Cup, immediately condemned the decision, noting the dangerous precedent of allowing host nations to selectively exclude participants based on political grievances. Saudi Arabia, despite their own complicated relationship with Tehran, issued a surprisingly supportive statement emphasizing the sanctity of international sporting competitions. The Asian Football Confederation called an emergency meeting, with representatives from 46 nations expressing concerns, ranging from confusion to outrage. Europe's response split along predictable lines. Britain's government offered measured statements about understanding security concerns while hoping for diplomatic solutions. France's foreign ministry was more pointed, suggesting that sporting events must remain insulated from political conflicts. Germany's Football Federation president gave an interview, stating bluntly that if host nations can unilaterally ban participants, the entire World Cup system becomes meaningless. Spain and Italy echoed similar sentiments, with footballing legends from both nations penning open letters defending Iran's right to participate. Latin America's reaction was perhaps the most uniformly negative. Having experienced their own struggles with American political interference over decades, countries like Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay were quick to defend Iran's position. Diego Maradona's former teammates organized a petition supporting Iranian participation, gathering millions of signatures within days. Mexican football officials found themselves in an awkward position, simultaneously co-hosting with the United States. While their public opinion overwhelmingly opposed the ban. Then there's FIFA itself, the organization that's supposed to govern world football with political neutrality. FIFA's constitution explicitly states that member associations should not be discriminated against based on political considerations. Article 3 of their statutes guarantees that national teams meeting sporting qualifications should not face exclusion for reasons beyond sporting merit. President Gianni Infantino found himself caught in an impossible bind. Alienate the United States, risking the most commercially successful World Cup in history, or allow a precedent that fundamentally undermines FIFA's authority and principles. Initial FIFA statements were masterclasses in saying nothing while appearing to say something. They acknowledged the complexity, emphasized ongoing dialogue, and promised swift resolution. Behind closed doors, however, emergency executive committee meetings stretched into marathon sessions. Legal experts pored over hosting agreements signed years earlier. Constitutional scholars debated whether the United States, as host nation, possessed special authorities beyond those of ordinary member associations. The tension was palpable. FIFA's entire legitimacy as football's global governing body hung in the balance. Let's talk about the legal maze this decision has created. International law surrounding sporting events exists in fascinating gray areas. The Olympic Charter grants the International Olympic Committee supreme authority over Olympic competitions, explicitly prohibiting host nations from excluding qualified participants without IOC approval. The World Cup operates under different but parallel principles. When the United States, Mexico, and Canada signed hosting agreements, they accepted obligations to facilitate the tournament according to FIFA regulations. Those regulations don't contain explicit provisions for host nation, security-based exclusions of qualified teams. American legal scholars have pointed to immigration law, arguing that the president possesses broad authority to deny entry to foreign nationals deemed security threats. Presidential proclamations have historically been used to restrict travel from specific nations. The Supreme Court has generally deferred to executive authority on matters of national security and immigration. Trump's legal team argues this isn't about football. It's about sovereign control over who enters American territory. But here's where it gets complicated. The World Cup isn't a series of bilateral sporting events. It's a global tournament operating under international sporting law governed by FIFA statutes, which themselves reference principles of non-discrimination and political neutrality. If Iran qualifies through the proper channels, FIFA argues, they possess a legally binding right to participate. The host nation's role is to facilitate, not to determine eligibility. Allowing security concerns to override qualifying results opens a Pandora's box. What prevents any host nation from excluding opponents based on subjectively defined threats? Consider the precedent this establishes. What happens at the 2030 World Cup, scheduled for Morocco, Portugal, and Spain? Could Morocco cite security concerns to exclude Israel, a possibility that would ignite Middle Eastern politics in ways football has carefully avoided? What about the 2034 tournament headed to Saudi Arabia? Might they exclude nations based on their own political calculations? The slippery slope isn't hypothetical, it's inevitable if this ban stands. International sporting law experts are nearly unanimous in their assessment. This violates established norms. Dr. Antoine Duval, a sports law professor at The Hague, gave an interview stating that allowing host nations unilateral exclusion power destroys the fundamental principle that sporting merit, not politics, determines participation. The Court of Arbitration for Sport, the supreme judicial body for international sporting disputes, has historical precedents supporting this view. When Russia faced potential World Cup exclusion due to doping scandals, the debate centered on sporting violations, not political considerations. The human dimension of this crisis cannot be overlooked. Iran's national team represents more than 11 players on a pitch. They embody the aspirations of a young, football-obsessed population desperate for international recognition beyond the headlines of conflict and sanctions. Mehdi Taremi, Iran's star striker playing for Inter Milan, gave an emotional interview describing what the World Cup means to Iranian children, growing up in economically devastated conditions. Football is their escape, he said. For 90 minutes, they forget about inflation, unemployment, restrictions. They dream. And now, someone tells them their dreams don't matter because of where they were born. Iranian domestic reaction has been predictably intense. Streets across major cities saw spontaneous demonstrations, with protesters burning American flags while chanting support for their national team. State television has run nonstop coverage framing the ban as another example of American bullying. Conservative hardliners, often at odds with the more moderate population, found common cause with ordinary Iranians in condemning the decision. Even critics of the Iranian government, and there are millions united in viewing this as collective punishment targeting ordinary people for political conflicts beyond their control. The ban has also ignited debates about sports and politics that extend far beyond this specific case. Should athletes ever be held accountable for their government's actions? When apartheid-era South Africa was banned from international sport, the justification centered on the sporting federation itself enforcing discriminatory policies. Iranian football, whatever one thinks of the Iranian government, doesn't discriminate in team selection based on ethnicity or religion. The players themselves are not government officials. They're professional athletes whose political views span the spectrum, many of whom privately oppose their government's hardline positions. Social media has exploded with this debate. Hashtags supporting Iranian participation trend alongside those applauding Trump's decision. Football legends have weighed in from all sides. Pel's family released a statement invoking his famous quote that football is the beautiful game precisely because it transcends politics. Cristiano Ronaldo posted cryptically about sport uniting people. Lionel Messi remained silent, though sources close to him suggest he's deeply uncomfortable with the precedent. American public opinion reveals fascinating divisions. Polling shows Americans split roughly along partisan lines. Republican voters overwhelmingly support the ban, viewing it as a legitimate security measure against a regime they consider dangerous. Democratic voters lean toward opposition, seeing it as unnecessary escalation that punishes the wrong people. But there's a substantial middle Americans who dislike the Iranian government but feel uneasy about excluding athletes from competition. That ambivalence reflects deeper uncertainty about where lines between security and overreach should be drawn. Within the American football community, voices have been notably divided. The U.S. Soccer Federation issued a carefully neutral statement, supporting whatever decision emerges from FIFA and the government's consultation process. But individual American players and coaches have been less diplomatic. Some prominent players have openly questioned whether this serves American interests, arguing that it makes the United States look petty rather than strong. Others have defended it passionately, invoking national security concerns and arguing that Iranian government officials embedded within the delegation could pose legitimate risks. What about the tournament's commercial dimension? Sponsors are in absolute panic mode. Companies like Coca-Cola, Adidas, and Visa have invested hundreds of millions based on projections of global engagement. Excluding Iran, a nation of 85 million with a massive regional audience, immediately reduces market reach. But beyond Iran itself, the controversy threatens viewership across the Muslim world, representing well over 1 billion potential viewers. Sponsors are quietly pressing both FIFA and American officials for resolution, terrified that this becomes the story dominating coverage rather than the football itself. Broadcast networks face similar calculations. Fox Sports paid astronomical sums for English-language American rights, betting on massive domestic and international interest. Telemundo secured Spanish-language rights with similar expectations. Both networks understand that controversy can drive short-term ratings, but long-term boycotts or reduced enthusiasm in key markets threaten profitability. Their executives have been in constant communication with FIFA, State Department officials, and the White House, seeking clarity on whether this ban represents a final decision or a negotiating position. Cities across the United States scheduled to host matches are confronting unexpected complications. Miami's substantial Iranian-American community has organized protests and threaten boycotts if the ban stands. Los Angeles, home to perhaps the largest Iranian diaspora community outside Iran, faces similar dynamics. Local officials in these cities worry about both the ethics and the practicality. Large demonstrations during matches could create precisely the security concerns the ban allegedly prevents. Mayors and governors are quietly lobbying federal officials for reconsideration, arguing that their city's diversity should be celebrated, not weaponized. Mexico and Canada, as co-hosts, find themselves in exceptionally awkward positions. Neither nation has hostile relationships with Iran. Both maintain diplomatic ties and relatively normal interactions. Canadian officials have been particularly vocal in private channels, expressing frustration that they're being dragged into an American political decision without consultation. Mexican diplomats face similar discomfort, especially given their nation's historical stance of non-intervention and respect for sovereignty. Both countries are exploring whether matches could be restructured to occur exclusively in their territories, if Iran somehow participates. Though FIFA insists the tournament's integrity requires matches across all three nations. Let's examine potential pathways forward. Scenario 1. The ban holds and Iran does not participate. FIFA, after exhaustive legal review and intense pressure, concludes it lacks authority to overrule the host nation's security determination. Iran's spot goes to the next highest-ranked Asian team, likely Syria or Iraq, both presenting their own political complications. The tournament proceeds amid controversy, with protests and boycotts reducing enthusiasm. Legally, this establishes a precedent that haunts future World Cups, empowering hosts to make politically motivated exclusions. The damage to FIFA's credibility is substantial and lasting. Scenario 2. Legal intervention forces reversal. Iran appeals to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which rules that FIFA's constitutional obligations supersede host nation immigration authority within the specific context of a FIFA-sanctioned tournament. The Swiss courts, where FIFA is based, might issue injunctions requiring either Iranian participation or tournament cancellation in the United States. This creates a constitutional crisis in America. Does international sporting law override presidential authority? The legal battle could stretch months, creating uncertainty that itself damages the tournament. Scenario 3. Diplomatic compromise emerges. Backroom negotiations produce a face-saving solution. Perhaps Iran agrees to enhanced security protocols, delegation vetting, restricted movement, constant monitoring. Perhaps matches involving Iran occur exclusively in Mexico and Canada. Perhaps the United States issues temporary, highly restricted visas under extraordinary circumstances. Trump declares victory on security. Iran participates under constraints. FIFA maintains its principles. Everyone emerges claiming success while privately acknowledging an ugly, compromised resolution. Scenario 4. The nuclear option. Iran, supported by numerous nations, threatens mass withdrawal if the ban stands. If 20 or more qualified teams refuse participation in solidarity, the tournament becomes impossible. FIFA would face choosing between relocating, impossible on this timeline, canceling, financially catastrophic, or forcing American reconsideration. This brinksmanship strategy carries enormous risks. Nations threatening withdrawal might not follow through when confronted with the consequences of actually missing the World Cup. Throughout all this, we must remember the broader geopolitical context. American-Iranian relations aren't deteriorating in isolation. This occurs amid ongoing tensions over Iran's nuclear program, regional proxy conflicts in Yemen and Syria, drone attacks on Saudi oil facilities, harassment of shipping in the Persian Gulf. and alleged Iranian involvement in attacks on American personnel in Iraq. Trump's maximum pressure campaign aims to force Iran back to negotiations on terms more favorable to Washington. From this perspective, the World Cup ban isn't about football. It's one more pressure point in a comprehensive strategy. Iranian leadership faces its own calculations. Do they make this a massive issue, rallying nationalist sentiment but potentially worsening isolation? Do they quietly negotiate, accepting compromise to secure participation? Hardliners within Iran's government see propaganda value in being martyred victims of American bullying. Moderates recognize that exclusion plays into hardline narratives, making diplomatic engagement more difficult. Iranian president and supreme leader face difficult choices with no clear winning options. Regional powers are recalibrating their positions. Saudi Arabia, typically aligned with American positions against Iran, finds itself uncomfortable with this precedent. The Saudis host countless international sporting events and plan to host the 2034 World Cup. They don't want norms established that could be turned against them. Turkey, straddling East and West, has condemned the ban while quietly reassuring Washington of its alliance commitments. Pakistan and Afghanistan, both Muslim-majority nations with complex relationships with both America and Iran, are caught in uncomfortable middle positions. European nations are frustrated by being forced to choose. They want strong transatlantic relations with the United States, but also value FIFA's independence and international sporting norms. The European Union's official position emphasizes that sport should remain separate from politics where possible, a statement calibrated to criticize without directly confronting Washington. Individual European nations with stronger American ties, Poland, for example, have been more muted. Those with more independent foreign policies, Ireland, Austria, have been more openly critical. China's position deserves attention. Beijing has remained relatively quiet publicly but is clearly watching. China hosts countless international sporting events and plans future Olympics and World Cups. The precedent that host nations can exclude participants for political reasons is something Beijing absolutely wants established. It could provide cover for excluding Taiwan, or nations supporting Tibetan independence, or any number of politically inconvenient participants. Behind the scenes, Chinese diplomats are likely encouraging acceptance of the American decision, while publicly maintaining studied neutrality. Russia, still reeling from its own sporting exclusions due to doping scandals and the Ukraine invasion, finds dark satisfaction in this controversy. State media portrays it as Western hypocrisy. Russia faces exclusions for violating international law, but America can exclude participants for pure political reasons. Russian officials have been gleefully pointing out the double standard, using it to deflect from their own sporting controversies. It's cynical but effective propaganda. At least domestically. African nations have largely condemned the ban, with their Continental Federation issuing a statement defending Iran's right to participate. African football has its own history of feeling marginalized by European and American powers, creating natural sympathy for nations challenging Western dominance in sporting governance. South Africa, having experienced sporting isolation during apartheid, has been particularly vocal, drawing explicit parallels between their own experience and Iran's situation. Though critics note the comparison is imperfect, given that apartheid-era exclusion was based on the sporting federation itself enforcing racial discrimination. What about the Iranian players themselves? These athletes have trained their entire lives for World Cup opportunities. Many play in Europe's elite leagues, earning substantial incomes but dreaming of representing their nation on football's biggest stage. They exist in a difficult space, benefiting from international careers while their national team faces exclusion. Some have spoken out cautiously, others remain silent, afraid that controversial statements could affect their club careers or create problems for family members in Iran. The emotional toll of being caught between nations, between club and country, between politics and passion for the game is immense. Consider the broader question of sporting boycotts throughout history. The Moscow Olympics faced Western boycotts over the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The Los Angeles Olympics saw Eastern Bloc retaliation. South Africa was excluded from international sport during apartheid. These precedents cut different ways. Supporters of the Iran ban point to successful uses of sporting exclusion as political pressure. Opponents note that Cold War boycotts were mutual decisions by participating nations, not unilateral host decisions. And South Africa was excluded due to discriminatory policies within sport itself. The timing of this decision is worth examining. With FIFA qualification not yet complete for 2026, Iran hasn't technically secured their place yet, though they're heavily favored to qualify from Asia. Trump's announcement preemptively bars them regardless of sporting merit. This timing suggests calculation making the decision now, years before the tournament, allows legal and political battles to unfold with time for resolution. It also provides leverage in other negotiations with Iran. If nuclear talks resume, World Cup participation could become a bargaining chip. Critics call this hostage-taking. Supporters call it strategic patience. We should address security concerns seriously. Could Iranian government officials embedded within the delegation pose legitimate risks? Intelligence agencies have tracked Iranian intelligence operations on American soil. The possibility of using a World Cup delegation as cover for intelligence activities isn't purely hypothetical, it's a genuine counterintelligence concern. But is tournament exclusion the appropriate response? Enhanced vetting, restricted access, constant monitoring, these tools exist short of total exclusion. The question isn't whether security concerns are real, but whether they're insurmountable. American Iranian communities are experiencing this crisis personally. Hundreds of thousands of Iranian Americans live in the United States, many fleeing precisely the government that now represents Iran internationally. Their feelings are complex. Some support the ban, viewing it as appropriate pressure on a regime they despise. Others oppose it, seeing their cultural heritage punished for a government they didn't choose. Iranian American football fans face the painful irony of potentially celebrating a World Cup in their adopted homeland while their heritage nation is excluded. Let's talk about the economic implications beyond sponsors and broadcasters. Iran's exclusion affects tourism projections. Tens of thousands of Iranian fans would have traveled to North America, spending substantial sums. Hotels, restaurants, airlines all projected revenues based on full participation. Regional economies and host cities expected boosts from diverse international visitors. Excluding Iran means excluding not just 85 million Iranian potential ticket buyers but also diaspora communities across the globe who would support their ancestral team. The youth dimension breaks hearts. Iranian children dream of the World Cup the way children everywhere do. Videos have circulated of young Iranian players crying upon hearing the news, unable to comprehend why their heroes can't compete. Youth development programs across Iran face demoralization. Why train obsessively for a World Cup that might exclude you not for lacking skill, but for circumstances beyond your control? The psychological impact on an entire generation of Iranian footballers cannot be quantified, but is undoubtedly substantial. What about alternatives to exclusion? Some have proposed that Iran's matches occur outside the United States, exclusively in Mexico and Canada. This preserves Iranian participation while addressing American security concerns. FIFA could restructure the draw to ensure Iran plays all matches in venues outside U.S. territory. Iranian fans could attend matches in Toronto, Mexico City, Guadalajara, Vancouver. It's complicated logistically, but not impossible. Whether such compromise satisfies Trump or preserves tournament integrity remains unclear. Religious and cultural dimensions add complexity. The Muslim world views this through the lens of respect and discrimination. Friday prayers across the Middle East have featured sermons condemning the ban as anti-Islamic. The narrative that America discriminates against Muslims finds reinforcement, regardless of whether that characterization is fair. Moderate Muslim leaders hoping to promote Western Islamic dialogue find their efforts complicated by headlines of exclusion and controversy. We must acknowledge that reasonable people disagree deeply about this. Some genuinely believe that the Iranian government poses sufficient security risks that exclusion is justified. They view protecting American citizens and visitors as paramount, superseding sporting considerations. They see no obligation to facilitate a regime they consider dangerous. Others genuinely believe that excluding athletes for their government's actions violates principles worth defending. They see sport as one arena where common humanity should overcome political hostility. Both positions deserve serious consideration rather than dismissive caricature. The countdown to resolution continues. FIFA has established timelines for legal review, with decisions expected within months. Iranian qualification campaigns proceed in parallel, creating the surreal possibility of Iran qualifying for a World Cup they're barred from attending. American courts may intervene if cases are filed. International pressure will intensify. Sponsors will demand clarity. Players will continue training in uncertainty. And football fans worldwide will watch this intersection of sport, politics, law, and international relations unfold in real time. This crisis reveals fundamental tensions in our globalized world. Can international institutions maintain authority when powerful nations reject their rules? Can sport remain separate from politics when everything is politicized? Can we protect legitimate security interests without collective punishment? Can nations with hostile relationships compete peacefully in sporting contexts? These questions extend far beyond football, touching on the nature of international cooperation itself. Whatever happens, this moment will be remembered. Future historians examining the intersection of sport and geopolitics will analyze this case extensively. It will appear in textbooks alongside previous sporting controversies, studied for lessons about power, principle, and compromise. The decision will shape not just the 2026 World Cup, but how international sport operates for decades. Precedents matter, and this one cuts deep.